Hello there and welcome to this webinar today. My name's Stephen Bourne. I'm the Pre-Sales Director here at Embarcadero, and today we're going to be talking about how you can get started as an ISV with InterBase. This session is going to be full of some tips and tricks and some of the great information that you need to really kind of kickstart the next part of your journey. So joining us online today is Shriram. Hi Shriram.
Hi, Steven. Hi, Mary.
And Mary Kelly as well.
Hello.
So maybe it'd be useful just to kind of start by saying a little bit about yourselves. So Shriram, do you want to kick off?
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Sriram Balasubramanian. I've been working on InterBase for a couple of decades now, and I lead the engineering team here. And very excited to bring useful database technologies to our developers and customers for easily deploying the product.
Yeah, great. And Mary?
Hello again. Mary Kelly here. I'm a software consultant at Embarcadero, and I specialize specifically in InterBase. I love InterBase, and I love getting the opportunity to talk about it with anyone who is willing to listen. You can ask my colleagues. I work mostly with the InterBase VARs here in the US and Canada.
Okay, and a little bit about my background. I've been an InterBase VAR in the past myself when I was selling software commercially a number of years ago before joining Embarcadero. And in my time at Embarcadero, I've also had the pleasure of being the kind of associate product manager for InterBase for a few years before I moved into my current role. So some great experience on the panel today. We're really looking forward to the questions that you have. So please go ahead if you're watching this live and put them into the Q&A. If you're watching this on replay and you've got a burning question, then either reach out to your local sales rep or our email address is on the screen there. We always love to hear from you guys and what you're up to, and we have a very open door about hearing what you guys are up to. So today's session, as I said, we're going to try and cram quite a bit in. We're going to talk about, first of all, a number of different ways for connecting into InterBase. Following that, one of the kind of the key things around an ISV and kind of our InterBase files is how you install InterBase and how you embed it in, and the different options. So we're going to explore some of those, talk about some of the really nice features that exist for integrating that into your business processes. We're going to talk a bit about the kind of cross-platform support and some of the kind of great things that our customers have been doing, and also how InterBase can give you a real competitive advantage in the marketplace with some of the rather unique features it has across a broad range of platforms. And that will tie us nicely into some of our tips for success. We're blessed where we sit with hearing from hundreds of customers around the world who are using InterBase and embedding it into some really ingenious solutions. So it'd be great just to kind of give you some of the kind of the key things that we've learned that will really help you succeed and move forward as we go on. Now, because of COVID and because everybody's so distributed at the moment, the core part of this webinar has been pre-recorded so we can make sure the audio is okay and everything runs smoothly. So we are going to be live monitoring the Q&A through the session, but then we'll also have a live Q&A part at the end. So keep tuned into that. So just to kick off, Mary, I know you work with with InterBase VARs quite heavily. So do you want to tell the guys a little bit who are on the webinar a little bit about some of the great things that we have around the VAR program?
Yeah, so when you become a VAR, you essentially get to partner up with Embarcadero to resell or bundle in InterBase as part of the offering in your solution. So one of the greatest benefits to the InterBase VAR program is the margin discount that we provide to it. So volume licensing discounts is another way to state that. And the ability to silently install the InterBase product alongside or bundle it with your application, or even deeply embed InterBase into your application. We do have a program that allows for you to purchase an SDK for a 1-year term so that you can actually build and develop your InterBase and application platform together so that you can be as successful as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And the one thing we will say is that specifically for ISVs, we know every product and solution is unique. So do have a chat with your dedicated partner manager. They're really here to help understand what it is you're doing and make sure we can get the right option for you to be able to use InterBase within your solution. So definitely worth giving them a shout. Okay, so I think without waiting any further, let's get straight into talking about connecting to InterBase. So Shriram, loads of different ways. I know you've been heavily involved in the over the years with some of these different solutions. So do you want to kick us off in this section?
Sure. Well, many of our InterBase customers over the years, I mean, all the way since Borland and Code Gear and through Embarcadero and now in our current IDERA portfolio, we have had the privilege of having fantastic development tools that's available to our customers in way of RAD Studio, Delphi, C++ Builder, and in the past as well with tools like JBuilder, which is for Java development environment, and a few other development environments that we had tools for, IDEs for, I should say. Both RAD Studio and Delphi C++ Builder IDE toolsets are flourishing quite well. And we have a very, very loyal and passionate set of customers and developers who are using the product and have been using it for the last 25 years. In fact, Delphi just finished 25 years and we had our 25-year celebrations. So there's a long list of customers who have used databases, and the IDE is rich in database development tooling support as well as connectivity support. The database tooling within RAD Studio or Delphi C++ Builder, within the product itself, there are both InterBase specific connectivity tools as well as cross-platform or cross-database connectivity tools. FireDAC is the premier connectivity solution from RAD Studio. And when I say RAD Studio, I'm including Delphi C++ Builder as well. FireDAC has been the go-to connectivity solution for if you're an application developer who may have a need to work with more than one database vendor in the backend. And it supports InterBase very well. We also have InterBase specific connectivity solution that was developed prior to FireDAC by way of InterBase Express. We also call it as IBX. Both IBX and FireDAC have a native set of component libraries available for both Delphi and C++ Builder users from within RAD Studio. They are developed using Object Pascal, and so it's using the environment and the language tooling that comes with that particular IDE toolchain itself. They have direct connectivity to InterBase, and over the years, both IBX and FireDAC have supported all the platforms where InterBase can be deployed to. As you very well know, RAD Studio, Delphi and C++ Builder can build applications, can help you develop your applications for deployment on Windows, I would say Linux, Mac OS, and the mobile platforms like iOS and Android as well. And InterBase has offerings on all of those platforms, and these connectivity solutions also can help you run your applications natively on those platforms. Beyond that, I would say we have had a long history of supporting open database connectivity in terms of providing ODBC support for the ODBC support is very, very popular on the Windows platform. Of course, there is ADO.NET as well for the .NET framework. And then for the Java application developers out there, there's a Java database connectivity solution. InterBase bundles all these three different open database connectivity solutions as part of the product. So you can freely use it without having any licensing requirements for these database connectivity solutions. And then we have a plethora of third-party connectivity solutions, which we don't develop internally in the company, but there's a third-party ecosystem that develops support for uh, connectivity from Ruby, PHP, Perl, Python, and a few other connectivity solutions out there. So as a developer, you have a wide gamut of connectivities depending on the development environment that you're using and the IDEs that you're using. If you're using Eclipse, you can use our JDBC connectivity from Eclipse to build your Java applications. If you're using Visual Studio, you can use either ODBC or ADO.NET. And if you're using our RAD Studio development environments, of course, you can use IBX and FireDAC. Um, and both IBX and FireDAC have, of course, very good native connectivity for all of the recent features that we have developed in InterBase. And the open database connectivity solutions like ODBC and JDBC, of course, are limited in terms of what interfaces they support. So they may not have specific um, features enabled as we surface them in the product, but most of our features are anyway SQL pass-through. So
Yeah.
you can still use your ODBC or JDBC or ADO.NET applications to avail of those SQL features. As a database, we focus more on the SQL language as well as the performance aspects. So there is not a lot of limitation when you use these other database connectivity solutions to work with interface as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Certainly, kind of thinking back to the customers that we've got using different types of connectivity. You know, one of our big VARs actually uses Visual Studio to do their development, and they're connecting in using ADO.NET to connect in. Um, so I don't think I'm allowed to say which name specifically for that one, but uh, yeah, one of our huge, one of the very very big bars that we have, and they're deploying directly into kind of medical institutions around the world with their products, using Visual Studio and ADO.NET to connect into Interbase, which is pretty cool.
In
Cool.
addition to that, I would
Mm-hmm.
also say, Stephen, ODBC is still very much in use and
Mm-hmm.
popular with a lot of customers, whether they're using spreadsheet applications like Excel to tap into interbase data,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're writing your own ODBC connections from, say, MS SQL deployment, where you may have certain things where you have to pull in data from interbase or dump data from your other databases to interbase.
Mm-hmm.
That's a place where ODBC comes is very useful for customers to do that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's quite a nice discussion point. I think we might come back to that one a little bit later on around kind of open innovation, because it kind of ties in quite nicely to some of our tips that we'll be touching on. So that's a nice point, Sharem. We'll park that one there. But Mary, anything on connectivity you want to add before we move on?
Just only that I will say, while a large grouping of our customers do tend to, um, move towards the RAD and
Mm-hmm.
Delphi sort of C++ builder environment, we do support all of those additional platforms as well. So really, whatever application development that you're working in, InterBase is always going to be a great option for you.
Yeah, I think the really nice way to sum that up is saying, we know a lot of people are going to start off with RAD Studio and C++ Builder, but whatever kind of projects you've got coming on, wherever you need to get the database connectivity into other things in the future, if it's kind of, you have a mandate to have certain things built in Visual Studio around some of the ADO the ASP.NET or something like that, you can still connect into the same database very very easily, and it's there to work with you. So it's a good choice for today and wherever you're going to go into the future. Okay, so let's move on to the next part here now today. Installing Interbase. So I know we've got a few different ways to kind of get Interbase installed, which obviously is going to depend on the platform that you're deploying to, and we'll talk a bit about the cross-platform support in the next kind of topic area. Um, but there's three kind of main ways of installing the kind of the server or the desktop type of version of Interbase. And that's either through a GUI installer, where it's like next, 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 finish. Unlike other databases, you don't need to be sent on a 2-day training course to learn how to set up and configure and install the database. It's next, 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 finish, done in 15, 20 seconds. Um, there's also the option to have the silent install, and I think Shram might kind of give us an example of that in a moment. and there's also a command line way to install it quite quickly, which kind of all ties in quite nicely to the kind of topic around license keys or license files. So one of the benefits Mary mentioned at the start of the presentation was around having the silent installation, and we have what we call slip files, which can be combined to provide a specific number of licenses into an InterBase instance, and that gives you real flexibility in terms of what you deploy as an ISV. But it allows the completely silent embedded install. So to the point that customers don't even know it's there and installed and running as part of the product that you're offering. You just got it embedded within your product, and because it's very unique in the way that it runs, with the near zero admin, very robust. Pull the plug out the back of the machine, plug it back in, and InterBase will up and go. It's uniquely, trying to think of the right word. What is it? Positioned for doing that kind of stuff. Um, the other option is just to get license keys as and when you want them. And certainly we see this with certain ISVs who may be deploying an embedded version typically for 5 to 10 users, but then once in a while they get a customer who needs an unlimited server license. So it's sometimes easier for them just to get one of those on their special pricing contract, and install the license key manually rather than embedding the license within. Just kind of gives them a little bit of extra sense of what they're trying to do with things. So I think that's a general overview. Shriram, did you want to add anything, or just do you want to show us
Yeah,
the example?
I will. Yeah, just a quick point about the licensing aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as a VAR, you typically need the flexibility to deploy InterBase based on what your customers need.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anywhere from a single user using the product, or you can have hundreds of users connecting to the same database server using your application. In each one of these cases, you may want to have the flexibility to customize your deployment environment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you may want to bundle certain single user licenses with your product, but also stack on more users as a certain class of your customers need them. Some customers may want to start with 20, 25 user licenses and go up from there by adding another 10 users at a time, or
Mm-hmm.
a single user at a time as they grow in their business. So you have the flexibility right now when you sign on the VAR deal with Embarcadero for InterBase. You do get the flexibility to define what license packages are you interested in deploying. And you will then go ahead and get the slip files, as Stephen alluded to. These are installable license files, which do not require an end customer to actually register the license. So these are already pre-licensed keys that you have provided that you can bundle with your application. And when you install InterBase from there, these licenses are installed as well. So the end user or your customer does not have to go through configuring the system for the number of users that
Mm-hmm.
they need. As they have purchased your product, you will automatically know what is the custom packaging for the licenses that you need to provide them.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's great about the license files when you're installing is that you don't have to kind of call up and say, right, I need to get a 25 user license for a customer that I've got to install tomorrow who's just come in, and it's just literally turn up, install, and the reporting happens afterwards, and it works really well as part of that kind of helping enabling you to have that flexibility to deploy rapidly whenever the customer comes in and asks for it. So
yeah, and
okay.
it is really nice because it is as simple as just a text file basically that just gets added in there.
Mm-hmm.
That just happens to have that .slip at the end for the file extension. So it's a very nice process, and typically a very smooth once you've kind of practiced it once or twice, you're a pro. So.
Mm-hmm.
And the aspect of stackable licenses is something that does not require you to reinstall the product. Say you have a deployment with a 25 user license and you want to add another 5 user license because their requirements have grown in terms of peak performance requirements. So you can just go ahead and get the next 5-user license file from your VAR. I mean, the customer can just request a VAR, purchase another 5-user license, and the VAR can just deploy that single license file, as Mary alluded to, the text file into the InterBase license folder. And you can do two things. One, either you restart the InterBase server, and now the new license is automatically available to you, or you can just let that license file stay there, and the InterBase server actually refreshes the license information every 24 hours. So you don't even have to bring down your system in case your system is a 24/7 application. You can work with the 25-user license, and the next day it will pick up your additional 5-user license and stack it on top of the 25 without you needing to do any restart at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes it very flexible and very easy to use. So we thought it would be great to kind of show you guys literally how easy it is to embed it in, and Shrim's kind of managed to get a setup ready to do that. So um, if you want to
Yeah.
get your stopwatches ready, this is going to be quick. So um, Shrim, let's have a look at it.
Yeah, the amount of time that it will take is probably just me talking about it. But again, here we go. Well, the InterBase install is a very clean and easy install. So on our documentation side, we have links to go get the information about installation, and you can customize your installation um, using the property values that are mentioned in the documentation right there. What we'll look at today is just a sample of how to get that done. So in this directory, I have just collected the InterBase installer. This is our InterBase Windows installer, 64-bit server edition. And then we have two other files. The reg IB2020 demo.txt is a license file, which includes all the license attributes of InterBase that you can use. Typically, this would be a 25-user license or a 1-user license or an unlimited user license, or whatever the license it is that you have as per your VAR agreement with InterBase. And the other file, InterBase custom install values, you can name this file anything, but I just named it InterBase custom install values, so it's self-explanatory. This is just a properties file for the installer. When you run the installer in silent mode, you can posit this properties file, and it will install InterBase where you want it installed and with the parameters that you want. So let's just quickly go through the properties. You're asking the installer to be run in silent mode, and you want it to be installed under your own folder. Of course, by default, I'm using Embarcadero interface and given it a name so that it's distinguishable from other instances of InterBase that may be present on the system. Your customer may be using another third-party application that has its own InterBase embedded. So you want to definitely identify your InterBase instance with the name. You can give this any name. You want to install your InterBase instance with the name of your application so that you know that that instance belongs to your application. For the purpose of this demo, I just call the instance IB2020 demo, and that's how I would identify that as an instance name as well. So InterBase can be a multi-instance on your system, on any system. You can have multiple versions of InterBase running, each within its own silo, and each serving a particular class of applications or a particular set of applications from another VAR or ISV. The instance name is something that's mandatory if you are installing it as a multi-instance. Slip file name is the license file that I alluded to that you got from Embarcadero. You will need to specify the absolute path name where the license resides. So the installer picks this license and installs it into the right InterBase folder once it's done with the install. Typically, a server edition customer would choose an install set of server and client. So this is a server and client install set. If you just wanted to install the InterBase client on some of the desktops where you have your application, if there are multiple users connecting to a single server in the backend in your intranet, for example, or within the department, they have one server instance of InterBase installed, but they want to have multiple clients installed on each one of those desktops that users are using application on. What you would do is you would install the server install set on the backend system, and then you would change this to client for all the desktops where you're installing InterBase. So the client part of it will only install the client libraries that are required on those desktops, and your application will be able to connect to the remote server that's running in the backend. But for the purpose of this demo, we are going to install the full InterBase product. Server TCP port is the TCP port socket ID that it would be listening to. You can put any number out here. Just make sure that that number is unique to your use. You don't want to be colliding with some other application that is using that TCP port. InterBase by default installs with TCP port 3050. So if I am a VAR, I would definitely try and avoid using that TCP port, because you can have a developer or somebody else who's installed the default instance with 3050. So you want to identify a TCP port that is unique to your application. Multi-instance is something that we already spoke. Yes, this instance needs to be a uniquely identifiable multi-instance. You are installing the English language version of InterBase. We do provide a Japanese edition kit as well. So for customers in Japan, they may choose to say language is Japanese. So thereby the right documentation that is installed and such. We do want this install to be available system-wide, not just to a single user. And this is the important one parameter that you would set: reg equals false. Reg equals false, meaning you do not want this install to kick off the registration process. You already have provided a license file that's embedded with your install, so you do not want any you do not want any extra registration to happen for that license. And architecture that you're choosing is a 64-bit architecture. If you were using any of the older Windows platforms which have only 32-bit editions, so you can also run the 32-bit architecture of InterBase if you wanted to do that. But for this demo, we are using the 64-bit architecture. So all you would do here is run this installer now. Now that you have the properties file, you will just run the installer with the file parameter and give the custom attributes file. Agree that you want to run that. So Windows operating system will just install the properties. What this does is the installer will go through and do all of the steps, because you've already given it details about where it needs to install it and what license file it needs to install within that and how it needs to identify itself. So the installer goes through all the setup behind the scenes. We're going to take a look at the folders just to illustrate where it has actually installed. The location where you wanted to install InterBase was InterBase _ IB 2020 _ demo, right? So you will see that the install is already completed and it has installed InterBase. You have the binaries and the documentation files and everything else installed right here. Just as you would do when you're installing it as a UI. The documentation is installed by default, and all of the files out here. The one thing that you may want to take a look at if you wanted to is there's an install log file which details what the installer did. So if you wanted to analyze that or send that back, if there are any complications, you will use this install log file to see where it is installed and if it ran into any particular problem.
Well, it's pretty quick, isn't it? So, yeah, just literally, we saw the command line return back that it was done within what, under 10 seconds.
So here's the proof, right? The installer began at 2:18:55 and it finished at 2:19:12. That's about 17 seconds.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh my.
So that's what it does. And the one additional file that I would probably just want to show here today is the license file that you ask the installer to use when installing the product. It basically copied the license file automatically to the InterBase license folder. So right out of the bat, it's copied the license that you wanted to deploy. And now we'll also see where it has installed. So InterBase by default on Windows has two different areas. One is a program install area for program files. And Windows is pretty strict on having writable files by users. So it puts the InterBase puts the writable files in the program data area automatically. You do not have to give it where it needs to go. We decide based on the name of the instance that you have installed. We go ahead and create a folder underneath the program data folder, and all of those writable files are kept here. So your user authentication database and your examples and your license files are all writable. So they go into this program data hierarchy. As you will notice out here in the license folder, here's where your license is. It got automatically installed by InterBase. So that completes our install picture.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, Shram. I think it's amazing how quick InterBase gets installed and we're up and running. Obviously, the license files are for servers and the desktop local network environment.
Yep.
For mobile, then there is a license file that you get distributed with your installation of Architect or Enterprise Edition for RAD Studio, Delphi or C++ Builder, that gives you a runtime royalty-free InterBase license, which means you can deploy it onto iOS and Android completely free, with the full power of InterBase behind you, which is remarkable. Which kind of ties us nicely into our next section, which is cross-platform support. So we kind of ticked a couple of those platforms off very quickly in the conversation there. Obviously, we've just seen the Windows installer. There's a Linux installer which you can run from the command line as well. There's the ability to run InterBase out onto Mac OS, and so we've got all the kind of the core desktop platforms supported there. But also, out onto mobile with iOS and Android, 32 and 64-bit full support across the platforms there, which is great. And I say it is completely runtime royalty free. So regardless of the database that you're using in the back end, from your server, your desktop, you could be using SQL Server today. You can still take a copy of InterBase out onto the mobile and benefit from the high security, the ability to run things like change views, have multiple users, which is again quite unique on a mobile database, which means that using the low-level encryption options within InterBase, if we imagined, Mary was the head of HR and she was able to pick up one of the tablets from the office and connect in and actually see all the salary information for people, whereas Shram and I, who aren't part of the HR department, can pick up the same tablet and log into the same application, but instead of seeing the salary information, we'll just get a 0 returned back. Now, that's just to do with the user authentication setup. The programming and the coding and everything else like that is just exactly the same. It's just a data layer management, and you can afford that kind of flexibility across platforms. So, and that's unique to kind of getting across onto mobile. Things like SQLite, it's you see everything or you see nothing. It's basically a text file on steroids. Whereas with InterBase, you get full enterprise grade security across all platforms. So when it comes to development, you literally can develop it once, you can test it on your Windows machine, and then you can distribute the same data file because it uses the same on-disk format across all platforms anywhere. And even up to pushing these up on, we've got customers who are running cloud instances up on Amazon EC2. We do our own internal tests on versions for that, because we have customers running it out there. No, pretty much wherever you want to go, off you go. And it's also one of the things that I quite like about our cross-platform support now. Obviously, InterBase is powering RAD Server. It's the back-end database managing all the user security and all the other kind of value adds that whole MEEP stack provides. And with the Docker implementations and support, having the license installed on your machine, you can boot up the Docker instance and have it point back to that actual physical license, to be able to do a whole DevOps type of approach with InterBase powering the whole back end of it, which is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. So, anything else you guys want to add on the cross-platform support?
I just mentioned that all the platforms that you see out there, both InterBase and IB Lite, support all of those platforms in both 32 and 64-bit flavors. Um, and IB Lite, of course, as Stephen alluded to, is a free offering that's available for all RAS Studio users. And IBToGo is available also for deployment for, I think, the RAS Studio Architect Edition.
Enterprise and Architect, yeah.
Enterprise and Architect, they come with IBToGo licenses bundled in for those customers.
Yeah.
But IB Lite is available for all users across all platforms. And if you're just building a client-server application to use InterBase Desktop or InterBase Server Edition on the other three desktop and server platforms, you can still go ahead and just, we have the client libraries available in the RAD Studio development environment to build your applications for Windows or Mac or Linux. And they will just work as a client application, and you will use a client-only install part of it and use a common InterBase server in the backend. And to go from using an InterBase to Go application or a fully embedded application to a server-side application or server edition InterBase, there is no change to the kind of facilities that you get with InterBase. The API is the same across all of our editions, and it's all driven by the licensing bits in terms of what facilities are available. For example, disaster recovery or change views are not available in the freely available in the free IB Lite license, but they're available. The change view support is available in IBToGo as well as server edition. Disaster recovery may not make sense when you're just embedding your application with one database and using IBToGo or IB Lite. But if you're having a server edition where multiple users are connecting, you may want to have a disaster recovery setup in case there's a system failover required. So server edition comes with disaster recovery built in. So there are some additional aspects as well, like things like performance monitoring is available in a server edition. So you can go cross-platform and benefit all of this functionality across all of these platforms, and embedded IBToGo and IB Lite showcase a lot of the functionality that's available within your application.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's quite nice, you mentioned about the to-go libraries. Rather than having to install the client, you can actually just use those to connect up to an InterBase server with your application. And I've actually seen that on a number of customers where they use IB Lite to be able to have that connectivity then to connect back across the network rather than having to go around and install the InterBase client. And it is an option. And one of the really cool things is actually from mobile. If most mobile use cases, you want to have a middle tier. You need to have that data served out by a server that's stateless, because especially things like mobile phones going from point to point, the connection's going to be up and down. So it's not conducive to a stable connection for a database that you'd have normally across a network. But that said, we do have customers who are running within a warehouse, and they are set up with mobile applications from ruggedized devices that are running Android, that are connecting back in real time back to the InterBase server that they've got running on the same site with a live connection. And they're using things like the events on the server side to then do push notifications of data back to the client of things that are changing. So as people are going around and picking a specific order, you could have 5 people out picking for the same customer off the same order at the same time, and using things like the InterBase events and the change views, they're able to update rapidly in live time data that is changing on the server with very, very little work. And it's all powered in through the FIDAC components with the properties that you can set up. It is super low code to set up and have that kind of working. And if you imagine the amount of work it would take normally to set up a whole push notification server and all the other kind of stuff, and the lags that you're going to get from push notifications routing out through the internet, having it live time in milliseconds inside the network is phenomenal. And you're just not going to be able to do that same kind of response with anything else. It really is it's almost kind of sneaking into the top tips really before we've kind of got there, I guess. But it really is a very powerful solution that way. So, Mary, anything to add on the cross-platform before we move on? Or?
No, I think you and Sriram covered it quite nicely.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to our next section then, which is our tips for success, kind of nicely segregated in. So, Mary, do you want to kick us off on the? Because I know you work a lot with the VARs and uh, quite a bit to say around some of the account management side of things.
Yeah, I mean, as we can see here, the first sort of tip that we have is to chat with your account manager. So essentially, they'll be able to start helping you through the process of saying, are you looking to become a VAR? Okay, what are the steps to becoming a VAR? And usually, from at least a technical standpoint, they'll pull in someone like myself or Steven or some of our colleagues across the globe to really be able to kind of step in and help you set up InterBase, make sure that your application, your InterBase kind of direction and the process that you're wanting to follow is kind of the smoothest transition for you, so that as we move forward with the partner agreement, everyone is in a position to be able to be successful no matter what.
Yeah, they're here to be your superhero internally to help the business side of things work, and the technical side of things, the support's around you, but we're also there to make sure that you as a business are working well as well. And a good relationship with your account manager will really, really help that. We've seen that time and time again. Okay, cool. The second one I put down there is really about open innovation. Don't recreate the wheel. Let's look at the trends in the marketplace now. The microservices that are happening, and if it just kind of looking at wider afield. One of the things, I like my cars, but if you look around what's happening now, we don't see every car manufacturer going out trying to build a new infotainment system to put into a vehicle. They're all looking to the Apple, or Googles of the world, who have got predefined kind of solutions that they can go integrate in. And with that, one thing that's having the focus from the whole market means you get a better experience as a customer. And that's the kind of things that you're going to be asking for when you go to buy the car. You don't care who's producing it and putting it in there, or if Mercedes have built it, or if Ford have built it. You just want something that's working, that gives you the kind of things that you want to be able to do. And that's the whole thing about open innovation, is bringing in the best of breed to help support you with what you're doing. And we've certainly seen that in terms of uh, what we've done with the InterBase products. I know back when I was working with the team, and we went through the amazing journey of getting InterBase change views to market. We were taking in ideas and concepts and the requests from all of our customers around data replication, some of the challenges they were looking at and wondering how they could face up to. And we managed to deliver an IoT award-winning solution with a new patented feature called Change Views. And what that's enabled some of our customers to do, even in the medical realm, is to produce the ability to move data seamlessly between databases without any log files. So there's nothing that needs to have access to be able to pass to find out what fields have changed, and still be able to identify specifically which fields have changed, so we can actually have that rich data being moved around. So not only does it simplify the whole data movement, but it means that from a standards and compliance point of view, we're able to provide our customers something very, very unique to help them have a real competitive advantage. And it's all come as part of their license, their ongoing relationship with us. So that whole open innovation approach, really, we're here to help support and to build those kind of things in, which is why we have such a good relationship and communication channels through our account management teams, but also directly into the product management team, which is why people like Shrem are here and on this call today to talk and to hear from you guys as well. So I think those two things kind of tie nicely in together. I think some from our customer stories. We've mentioned a couple of different things as we've gone through, but kind of thinking outside the box, really. Having the local connectivity when you need it, having the ability to kind of sync data down and have that live briefcase that is always ready to go with things like change views, is a phenomenal thing. And I think actually, because it's something we've now touched on a couple of times, I think, Mary, you've kind of got a pretty cool demo of change views there. So, do you want to take a couple of minutes and just kind of show us through, that kind of top tip just to close us through here?
Yeah, of course. In our Change Views demo today, we're going to look at the generic Change Views application that ships with both Delphi and C++ Builder. In the past, change notification typically involved triggers, you had logging, or write-ahead transaction logs. And this was a really time-consuming process and affected the database performance for developers and for end users for specific transaction loads. Now with Change Views, there is no performance overhead on existing transactions that you have because it maintains a consistent view of the changed data that's observable by other transactions. Now, if we move into IB console, you can see here that I have a database called sub with a single table named tab. If I open up tab, we can see here I'm looking at an ID and a name, and I have some data points here. Now you can also see that I have a subscription, which is a requirement for using change views, and we've created the subscription called sub on the table called tab for rows to insert, update, and delete. We have an FD connection that opens the connection to the database with this original query listing out select everything from tab, and we have a grid that then returns the contents of that table. We have a separate connection that runs to the same select all from tab query and pulls that data from the table. Now we have this EA changes, also called an event alerter, and this changes query is actually run by this event alert that automatically refreshes, so we have the most up-to-date data that's been added to the database. The change alert is then set to the delta merge, so it merges only the delta, telling it the subscription name that we had, which is sub, and then it just reports that back. Now we can run this application and open up our connection to the database. So this application will open both database connections and also the queries as well. So now we have data that's being pulled. Now if I go through and make any changes to this, so I'll use and I'll spell out my name, we can now see that the second grid here, the query that's run by the change alert, every time that a change is then made, it refreshes the query that we have for queue changes and then allows for the data to be shown that it's been changed. Now if I go through again to my name and make a change, and we'll just say change this to Mary Kelly, that the original data plus the delta itself has also been added. I can also go through, if I'm looking at remote data, and I can merge that data and then also commit updates as well. And if I go back into my database tab here, if I go through and add user data, let's just use change views, go ahead and commit that, you can now see that the data itself was actually changed even from the server. So if we go through and close out this application and then reopen the application, we can open that DB connection and see that the changes are still here. Now the benefits of using change views as an InterBase VAR is that you have a cost-effective and fast method to keep data updated with the changes only. You have a clear way to present that data to your end users using notifications on changes or updates out in the field or changes made by the server. And as an InterBase VAR, change views provides you with more flexibility across your platforms, better data transmission performance, real-time event alerts, and lower network traffic and costs associated with moving data.
That's brilliant. So one of my favorite features with change views. So let's just kind of keep moving through though. One customer story. It's always good to have a customer story on these sessions. We often get asked about, will InterBase scale with what we're trying to do, and how does it work through? And I think one of the nicest things we can say about InterBase with the zero administration side of things is it really is here to scale with you. There's no better story to be able to tell than kind of stuff that with Opus Capita. They used InterBase for their early POCs when they had a few sites, being able to get going with InterBase. And as their business grew and their customer base grew, they're now on a server that is powered up with some decent amount of memory, a solid state drive, but still a fraction of the spec for some other top end databases would to provide the same kind of throughput. And at their peak load, they're processing over 500,000 new records a day into InterBase. 500,000 financial transactions, and they're being trusted by governmental organisations, huge blue chip organisations around the world to be able to process and automate their whole e-commerce invoice management side of things, including procurement happening. And they're kind of their superpower, providing out a great solution with InterBase behind it. And they've got a very small development team who are able to kind of outperform the competitors in the market because of the great tools they have around them with Rad Studio and also InterBase. So a really nice story, I think, to kind of to finish off our session today. Okay, so just to sum up, we've had a look at a number of different things that we can do around the connectivity with the different IDEs, with the different language, protocols like ODBC, JDBC, and so on. And we've had a look at the great ways that you can get installing InterBase with the silent installation and the slip files to really deeply embed it and hide it away into your product. But equally, if you want it to kind of pop up the installer and let the customer see that you're proud to be using it, it's equally there to do. We've spoken about the cross-platform support and some of the very unique things that InterBase can offer in terms of cross-platform connectivity and also security levels that really do set itself apart. And also mention how you can get free licenses with your Rad Studio product license. And we've discussed through some of the kind of tips for success that we have around open innovation and also kind of things like change views, thinking about the things that really bring value. And we've seen that time and time again. And one other quick case study to mention was a pharmacy chain that we did a POC with, who put a copy of InterBase alongside. Well, it kind of runs from the demo that Mary did just a minute ago. They actually put InterBase alongside their SQL Server database to be able to push that drug information around. So that took them from sending out tens of thousands of disk updates to all the pharmacies every week, or I think they were doing it monthly in the end, but to actually having synchronized data on a daily basis, which was phenomenal. So without further ado, let's get into our Q&A. Okay, so hopefully my screen is showing there and you can hear me, and can work out, get my camera back on. There we are, there's me. So, and there's Mary joining us, and I think Shram, I saw his camera pop on a little bit earlier too. It's great. So just before we kick into the Q&A, we've got a special promotion that has been just made available exclusively for you guys on the webinar today. And hopefully you should be seeing that on the screen now. One of the things that we're seeing a huge amount of growth around some of our InterBase customers is around taking out the InterBase unlimited user license server, especially for kind of cloud-based deployments and kind of web services and website kind of backends. We've got there's a number of websites that are actually using InterBase behind it. Chain reaction cycles, for example, is one, which is one of the most popular bicycle companies around Europe. But you can go ahead and get a license of InterBase there, and we're bundling in with that a whole year maintenance and support. So that means you'll get kind of normal support calls through, but also any updates that are pushed through from 2020, you'll be getting those through as well, which is phenomenal. So that's a great offer that's been made available. So let's just jump back into the kind of Q&A part. Any specific questions that have come through that you guys want to pick up to start off with?
I see a lot of sales related questions. So maybe Mary and you can
Okay.
kick those off. And then there are a couple of technical ones, one for Mary and one I can help answer later.
Okay, so I'll just repeat a couple of the bits that have been put into the Q&A. So if you go to the Embarcadero website and go to the contact sales part, there's a form to fill in there. One of the drop-down options is that you're interested in the ISV OEM program for Interbase. So if you choose that, what that will do is it will identify you where you are in the world and help get you directed to the right person in the the local geo for you, to be able to start having those conversations and to be able to help you forward. The way we work as Embarcadero is with a wide partner network, with the back end support from people like Mary, myself, and Shriram, to support those guys out in the field, and that provides you the local relationships and also the ability to kind of get things done, in a much smoother way. So please go ahead, fill that form in. We'll get you directly connected to the most relevant person to start you along that journey, which, having been down that journey myself, is quite a fun ride. So definitely worth doing that for. A few different questions again around kind of what it costs to get into the program and anything else like that. As was mentioned earlier, there's the $99 SDK pack, which is there really for development and testing at the phase that you're evaluating and wondering if it's the right way to go. As soon as you are looking at that, then we can get you going in terms of the conversations around the VAR program and what you want to do. And say, there's a lot of support around to help you do that, and some very bespoke pricing. It's very important for us to understand your product and your market and the way you're trying to sell to make sure that we can support you along that journey. So I say the best way to have those conversations is with the local rep, as is part of our tips. So please do that. Shriram, there's a question here about kind of supported platforms. So did you want to kind of cover that?
Can you just tell me which one is that?
This is just a general question. It's asking for IoT, which OSs do you support? But in general, it's a question around supported platforms.
Oh yeah, InterBase does support both in the server and desktop editions. We support the desktop server platforms, obviously, and the server edition supports Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And we do have a to-go edition, which is an embedded version that's bundled along with your application, runs in your application process. That is the to-go edition and IB Lite. Both of the to-go edition IB Lite are supported across on Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android. And all these 5 platforms, we support 32-bit as well as 64-bit editions. So if you're building applications that are 32-bit or 64-bit, you can continue to embed the like edition in your application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but in short, it matches up pretty well, exactly closely with what Rad Studio has, and has tended to lead the field a little bit when new platforms are coming through, to be there slightly ahead of it. So it's always worth keeping an eye on what Interbase is doing.
Definitely is.
Okay. There's also a question here. Magnus has put in here that he's got a customer who's collecting sensor data from hundreds of thousands of sensors and pushing them into an Interbase database, which is now running around about 25 gig in size, which is good. Beautifully responsive and super fast. He's had a question about if it might be good to split the database in any way, for different meter types or in some other way. So I think some of the 2020 stuff might be quite useful around that side. Shriram, is that quite right?
Possibly. I mean, 25 gigabytes is not a big database. It's big enough, but it's not super big. At the same time, if it's a few 100,000, I mean, you mentioned about 100,000 sensors. I'm assuming the number of applications that are dumping the sensor information into the database is probably less, and not in thousands of them. You probably have some application getting the sensor data, and maybe there are a few connections going into the database to dump this information. And if Interbase is managing with the load, I don't know how fast it is growing. 25 gigabytes is manageable with a few connections. I would say just keep it that way, unless you see the data going up very, very fast. If your collection of sensor data is growing by a few gigabytes every day or a few gigabytes a week, then it becomes a lot more in terms of being able to manage the backup restoring aspect of it. Maybe some sensors will go out of use, and some new ones will come in, and you may have to retire some of the data. So you can do that all in a single database, obviously. But with InterBase 2020, we introduced a feature called as tablespace support. And tablespaces allow you to virtually create specific tables. You can allocate specific tables per sensor type if you want to choose to do that, or a class of sensors. And you can choose to retire that table once that information is not needed anymore. And also it allows you to backup restore specific table spaces. Maybe there are certain sensor data that you may not need anymore. You can either truncate those off individually as the tables are not being used anymore, or you can delete those records directly, of course. But if you collected multiple sensors in a single table space based on the types, you can basically just get rid of that table space or archive the table space and move on with the remaining sensors.
Yeah, table spaces is a very powerful feature to kind of split part of the disk and to also spread the disk I/O, which is one of the big reasons it was introduced in.
Yes.
One of the other things I'd say is if you are finding you're having to push a lot of data in very, very quickly, batch inserting data is a very efficient way to do that. And there's things like ArrayDML, which is part of FireDAC, which is a very, very, very quick way to insert a huge amount of data very quickly. One of the other things that I've seen people using with sensor data in the past has been field arrays. So where a field has multiple value slots within it to be able to put the data in. So that's another thing that you can look at if you need to. But yeah, some great support in there for those kind of things.
I would add one. I think the question, the reason Magnus has asked that question was probably, is there a limit to the number of databases that InterBase can actually have online? So if you have one database per meter type, we are talking about 100,000 databases. Yes, so that I did not catch that part of it. Sorry. Yes, you would not want to have 100,000 databases online, obviously, because each database comes with it works within its silo, and depending upon how much memory you have allocated to host the database cache, you may be quickly using the system resources and not be able to avail of a shared database cache, which you can do right now with a single database unit. So you may not want to do a one database per meter type. 100,000 databases seem to be a lot to host for within a single instance of InterBase. Even though we do know customers do use hundreds of databases online, but 100,000 might be a number that might be not suitable for, and depending upon your system resources, of course. If you're allocating a few thousand pages per meter type to be hosted in memory, then that quickly sort of expands to 100,000 databases. You can do the math. That's a lot of memory to ask for from the system, and it may be more beneficial to just use it all in a single database, or maybe a few databases identified per class type of sensors.
Yeah, cool. So Mary, there's a nice comment here about your demo of change views, and Magnus is asking, is it possible to get hold of a copy of it?
Yes, so actually we ship the change views demo that I used directly with the Rad Studio product. So if you go into the FireDAC and DBMS specific InterBase section folder, then there's actually a change views folder that contains both this generic demonstration as well as the pharmacy demo that you mentioned, Stephen.
Yeah, so I think there's two parts of that. There's the bit that Mary's shown, but there's also a tool for reading another database and then picking the data and dumping it into the InterBase one to then enable the change view stuff to work, which is pretty cool. Yeah. A few other comments, just enjoying the demos, which is great, and the silent installer. How do they not know about that before? It's out. It's a big part of what's around. So The question here, I'm just trying to read it so I can rephrase it because English isn't probably the first language. Do different versions of InterBase have different storage sizes for the databases?
I'm thinking there are a couple of things I can probably quickly mention. InterBase storage size as in a single database page can be anywhere from 1 kilobyte to 16 kilobytes per database page size. So there's a nice, I can probably look for the, there's a InterBase limits page on our DocWiki documentation, which talks about what are the artifacts within the database that have a direct correlation with the database page size in terms of, say, number of pages that can be hosted in a single database, or how big the database can grow. And then along with table spaces, of course, it blows that number out of the water. We have petabytes of support. Technically, we can support that bigger database as well if you want to go towards the route. But hundreds of gigabytes or a terabyte or more are quite commonplace with database use with InterBase. Along with that, I would just mention that all the editions of InterBase, server, desktop, and to go, do not have any limitations on database size that you can use with the product as per the license. Whereas IB Lite, which is a freely available embeddable license, has a limit of 100 megabytes per database. So if you're deploying an application with IB Lite, you need to be aware of the 100 megabyte limit. But if you're deploying it with any of the other editions, we don't impose any limit on as per the license.
Okay, brilliant. Mary, any other questions there that you want to pick up?
Let's see. Yeah, just another question that you actually answered again, that can change views, track deletes as well. Yes, it can. So you can track inserts, updates, and deletes. So if you go ahead and take a look at the sample that I also used, or go through and rewatch this video again, then the sample that I used actually included tracking both inserts, updates, and deletes as well. So you'll be able to see all of that.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's unique, but it's you know, being able to track records that have been deleted and actually being able to query the data that's been deleted after it's been deleted. If you've got a change view on there, is actually quite a useful thing. You know, if you enable a change view on a table just to track deleted records, then if a customer ever does something silly, such as delete a record, at least you can then connect and find all the deleted records and what the values were at the point they were deleted. So you know, if they change all the values and then delete the record, you'll literally have the last record of or version of it saved there. So yeah, and I think this is, you know, this is one of the things that's is very cool about InterBase, is that you can set that up so only a specific subscription and user can see that. You know, if and you know, it comes back to the whole security side of things. You know, if you need to know what data has been removed from an audit point of view, you can set it up so only the auditor can actually track that and see if anything has ever been deleted. And the cost of the database is pretty much nothing. You know, it's the size of the record at the point it was deleted, and the same for, you know, being able to scale out. You know, because it's completely logless from a security point of view, nobody can pass a log to find out if records have been deleted. Only the person who's got the active subscription is able to do that. And you know, going back to the healthcare, I know we mentioned it earlier, but things like a HIV flag on a medical record, you know, that's not something you want people being able to pass a replication log file and find that a specific field has been changed on an individual, because there's only ever one reason why the HIV flag gets changed, and that is, you know, potentially a data breach, or, you know, inappropriate access to data that people shouldn't be able to get to. Whereas with InterBase, you completely bypassed all those security issues, and you know, it's phenomenal to have that level of security around replication data. which I don't think anything else in the world can offer that kind of same level of protection, which is phenomenal, and distributable scale as well.
I'll mention two quick things with regard to the delete question. Of course, you're talking about change views out here, so this may not be relevant. One is you can use, as Stephen mentioned, for sensitive data, you can use column level encryption within InterBase to hide the information that users are not supposed to see, or certain types of users are not supposed to see, by giving them some kind of a default value for that field, or they don't have deep privileges on those columns. And the other aspect that I wanted to mention was, if someone inadvertently deleted a bunch of records and you want to get those back, if you have used InterBase journaling or journal archiving, you can always restore your database to a point in time. You can recover your database to a point in time just before the delete happened. So if it was some very critical information that you wanted to get back, but you didn't really have a logical backup, or you didn't have the records to sort of put those back in, use your InterBase journal to play back those records till that point in time before the delete happened.
Yeah, journaling is a very, very cool feature. I remember one time when I was working out in the field, we had a club management system, and we used to store on the record a blob for the photo for the member when they're coming in, so we could know it was them and not somebody else. And one day we had a call from a club who was running out of disk space, and they needed to back up and restore their database and reduce down some of the photos from people who are no longer at the club. So being very helpful, the CEO of the company decided to step in on his lunch break to help out the support desk, took this one call, and then instead of just updating the membership table to remove the photo for people who were expired and not allowed to access anymore, he wrote a script to delete the member photo from these people. So the SQL script, what she actually did was purge the entire membership table one day before their backs run to collect all the membership dues. So we had a bit of fun kind of restoring and getting back a database from the night before, and then having to rebuild it all through. And that's one time that I really wish I'd had journal archives enabled on a database, because I would have saved myself an awful lot of time and effort. So I was very glad to see that feature come in the future, and certainly was something that was able to kind of pull in and add on to customers moving from that point onwards. Okay. So
there was one question from Alberto, I think on change views, about Mary's demo showcasing FireDAC. Are there other native components that are available? Mary, have you had any experience with IBX, or how that, or any other third parties that support change views?
Yeah, so I work with IBX a little bit. I won't say I'm an expert on IBX. I spend a bit more time with FireDAC just because I connect to several different databases. But yeah, with IBX, it's going to be a fairly similar process. Some of the naming standards are a little bit different, but for the most part, you can still do the exact same thing that you do with FireDAC, as I showed in the demo. I think we even have some IBX examples as well in our Delphi and C++ Builder samples that you can also go through and kind of play around with, and add some components here and there to forms, and really just dive deeper into what you actually can do with the IBX components.
Thanks, Mary. There's one additional point as well with regard to change views. Of course, FireDAC and IBX make it easy for you as a component user to use those in your applications. But change views as a feature set is available purely as a SQL pass-through as well. So you can just prepare your queries with the change view queries, like set a subscription, execute your query as you would do within a subscription snapshot, and you can work within that as within your application as well directly. The one wonderful benefit that FireDAC provides are these merge capabilities that Stephen alluded to. Stephen, you may have some specific things to talk about the merge capability.
Yeah, well, the merge capability of the FireDAC allows you to take the one data set and then merge it with the other one. And because you've got the delta, so if you select star from table A on the local database, and you run the same select star from table A on the remote database, and with your subscription active, you're then able to merge the delta onto the active local data set and then view in memory what's changed before you commit them down. With the FIDAC field properties, you're able to then highlight to the end user what specifically has changed at a field level. So that is immensely powerful, especially if you have any data conflict or resolution that you need to do. It takes the whole briefcasing to a new level, because you can't briefcase remote static data at a field level in any other way without a huge amount of administration work. And once you set the change view up, it's one line of SQL to activate the subscription, and you run the same query, and it just gives you the data. So it's very, very easy to implement through. Just to kind of finish with the architecture question, I think, which might have been part of what Alberto is asking around. So the way that sample works is there's actually a connection to the remote server, and that connection is not a normal database connection, it's an event connection. So InterBase has this ability to have events that trigger based on certain things happening. So you can set up an event to fire when a database record is inserted, updated, or deleted from a table. So on that connection to the server, it's basically establishing a waiting connection for a push notification from InterBase to tell you something's changed in an area that you're looking for. So when that happens, that then triggers the event in the local application to do the connection to the server to set the subscription active and find out what has changed, and then collect the delta and pull it back down. So even if you're not connected at that point, say you're kind of offline for 2 days, you can connect back up, run the query, and you'll get the delta. Or if at a point you're connected, you get the trigger, you'll get everything that's happened in the last 2 days plus what happened just now as your delta. So it really does make briefcasing data remotely a phenomenally easy way to do with exceptionally small data movement, which is why it won. Hold on, I'll pick it up here. This IoT award from the Total Telcos back in 2015, and that was quite nice. Going up and collecting that at Wembley with all the heads of the big telco organisations there, acknowledging something that is amazing from our database engine InterBase. So yeah. So there's a question here about deployment and embedding it on Windows 10. Okay, so if you're developing a Delphi application and you're using InterBase ToGo or IB Lite, let's say you're using IB Lite, the free version that you can just have a little bit of data storage inside your application. You can one trick that I have used in the past is using PA Server. So installing PA Server directly on my Windows machine, and then deploying from the IDE back to my Windows machine, but into PA Server. Now, if under the project options, if you set up the deployment to use InterBase ToGo and IB Lite, it will then deploy and put into all a folder all the files you need in the right locations, the license, everything else like that. And you've then got everything you need to just copy and paste onto another machine or put into your installer package. So that's a very, very quick way to get everything put together. I say if you're looking at doing the embedded installer that Shrem showed earlier, then the documentation for that is on DocWiki, or you can rewatch the webinar and see exactly how to do that again. The PA Server trick is quite a nice one, and there's an example of that on my blog. So.
Yeah, it's actually something that I recommend to all of our Delphi and C++ Builder customers anytime that they're working with even SQLite or even any sort of embedded platform. As long as they're trying to deploy as a release, I always recommend using PA Server just to make sure that everything's packaged up properly.
Okay, super. Any final comments? I think we're pretty much down the Q&A list here, the questions that have been passed through. So anything to finish off from either of you?
Not particularly. I mean, just we're always eager to hear if you have any specific use cases that are not serviced by InterBase and that we could look into expanding the feature set in. always eager to hear of your platform deployment constraints with InterBase as well, so we can work on further on scalability and performance. And please keep the information flowing and your questions coming.
Yeah, Mary, anything that you want to finish with?
Just to say thank you for attending this webinar, and that I hope that we've answered some, if not all, of your questions relating to InterBase and the VAR program.
Yeah, so just a reminder of that special offer that's on at the moment. Please feel free and go to the website and get connected up with the sales team to get located to your local partner and reseller. It's been great having the kind of good, interesting questions come through. If there's any great stuff that you're doing with InterBase, we always love to hear about it, and even more so if you're wanting to do a case study with us around InterBase. We've covered one in this session here. We had a few more in the previous one. These stories are always great to be able to share, and the team love hearing them. Even if it's something that we can't share more globally, it's always great to hear how you're using it and what you're doing, because that really does feed directly back into the decisions we make about the future of the product and how to help our customer base. So please keep that information coming through. Thank you very much for joining us, for the time, for the questions, and happy coding, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers, bye-bye.